Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. All this week on the show, we have been running a special mini-series aimed at educators who want to be good at teaching study skills. We're concluding today with a highly practical episode from Katie Holmes, which is effectively a case study on building a tutor time study skills programme. It's something Katie's worked very hard on in her school, and she's got a lot of incredibly practical takeaways to share with us today. Let's meet Katie and dive right in.
So hi, I'm Katie Holmes. I'm an assistant faculty leader in PE in a secondary school, and I'm also a faculty research lead, and that is the role that has driven me to the work that I've done, which I'm going to talk to you about today, around building effective independent learners through a tutor time curriculum and useful and effective revision strategies.
I look forward to hearing more about that today, Katie. Perhaps just to set the scene, I think we share the passion for this stuff. I wondered if you might just talk to why you believe this stuff is so important to take seriously in schools today.
I think it comes down to a couple of things. One of them being my own personal experience from being a student, and a student who worked very hard and wanted to get successful grades. But looking back, and when I got my results, I didn't get what I thought I was going to get. I mean, I still passed and I still got what you'd call good grades. But for the amount of time and effort that I put in, I was expecting more. And that was one of the things that I thought, well, what was I doing wrong? And I didn't have the support and the knowledge around effective revision strategies as a student. So it's very important to me that when I'm asking a student to go and revise, for example, for an assessment or a test, that I'm not just telling them to do it, but I'm telling them how to do it. Because time, as it is for teachers and adults, is just as important to students. And we've all got other things that we want to be doing. And I can imagine students have a lot of things they'd rather be doing than sitting and revising. So when they are revising, are they using their time in the most effective way and getting the most out of it? And I noticed you say it before, and it's something that I say a lot to the students, is, are you working smarter and not harder? And it's communicating that with students and staff to ensure that that's what we're getting from the students.
Absolutely. It's that kind of double sell of, like, you can aim for higher grades, no matter where you are on the sort of attainment spectrum. You know, you can aim that step or two higher.
Yeah.
And you can also get there in an easier way. You don't need to work quite as hard as, you know, if you were planning to work your socks off like you described in your own school days. And you know, I was similar, and, you know, my own journey was sort of definitely similar to that. And then even if you're saying to me, you know, I'm getting fantastic grades and I'm doing no work, you know, you're one of those very rare learners that's just breezing through school, could just do it, and it's coming so easy to you, and you think, well, why do I need this stuff? Well, your time will come. Your time will come. It might be when you go off to, you know, Oxbridge or go off to read medicine, and then suddenly you can't get away with just reading stuff through or making notes. You know, you will need this stuff sooner or later. Why not get in practice with it sooner? So I think those are for me always the three big things: higher grades, save you time, better well-being along the way, and better prepared for what's to come, the bigger challenges potentially to come.
Because I think as well, reflecting on myself as a student, what I was doing and what I thought was revision was actually the three most ineffective ways to revise. And still now, when you ask students, oh, how have you revised? Oh, I read through this textbook. And I always thought that if I had textbooks piled up on my desk and I'd read them and I'd highlighted them and they had post-it notes coming out of every page, that it looked like I was doing lots of work. And I was, because I was reading them. But as a student, I had no idea what retrieval practice was. And I think that's a word now that students are more aware of as well. And that's one of the biggest things when it comes to revision and the active recall, which I was unaware of. And by increasing that awareness for students and what these words mean and how to do it effectively is what's hopefully going to make more effective use of their time when when revising. And if they see themselves being successful using these strategies, they're more likely to use them and enjoy revision. That's what I'd love the aim to be, for students to enjoy revision and actually, get a sense of achievement.
That's a fourth benefit, isn't it? You enjoy the process.
Yeah, and get that sense of success. And when they get that sense of success, they're going to build their confidence. They're going to feel less anxious and stressed around exam time. And ultimately, that's our goal as teachers of what we want to develop in students.
Just to assuage my curiosity, you mentioned 3 ways you revised. You said rereading, I think you said highlighting. What was the third?
Rewriting,
there we go.
I always thought that if I just copied paragraphs out of textbooks and I'd fill notebooks up with loads of writing, but actually I hadn't learned anything. All I'd done is copied from the textbook into a notebook and made it look like my own work.
I don't know what your experience was, but sometimes people talk to us and they say, I look back at the notes I made 6 weeks ago and I know they're my notes because it's my handwriting, but I don't remember writing them.
And I couldn't tell you what they mean now, because if they're doing it in shorthand or, they're just making brief bullet points and things, what is it? Does it make sense? Is it going to make sense to you in 6 weeks' time? Because if not, then you're wasting your time.
So you mentioned coming across these so important ideas from cognitive psychology, retrieval practice, spacing at a later point. I wondered if you can remember the moment you first came across, say, the idea of retrieval practice. I wonder if you can remember what it was. Can you remember that moment of initial discovery? Was it a colleague? Was it a book? Was it a podcast?
It was a webinar from Kate Jones. I think it was a free webinar to start with, and then she's done a series of them. I was just in awe with what she was talking about and the ideas that she had to put into the classroom. And I just thought, I want to take this. And there was actually a teaching and learning group at the school I'm at around retrieval practice, as it was something that, not new because it's been around for so long, but it's almost come back. These things do cycles, don't they? And there was a teaching and learning group around retrieval practice and how we can embed it in the classroom. And I joined that. It must have been a few years ago now, and looked at all these different ways in which you could apply it into the classroom.
And what happened next? Did you start applying it straight away? What did you try first? Or were there, I'm interested in that journey, kind of what happened between that moment of initial discovery and, where you are today, implementing this grand whole school program. Tell us a little bit about the sort of steps that you went on in the middle.
So I watched her webinar and then I bought her book, and she's now got, I want to say, 4 books out. And one of them is particularly useful because it's a resource book. And prior to reading the book as well, I was looking on her blogs, and there was examples of worksheets and activities that you could do. So I applied those first of all. And I think the first one that I took was the retrieval grid, and looking at using it as a bell task at the start of the lesson and asking questions from last term, last year, last week, yesterday, to look at the spacing and how much students could retain and could recall from over different periods of time. And that was something that I started to embed nearly every lesson, because it was at a point where we'd covered quite a lot of content. So I was really intrigued to know what they could remember from previous times. So that was one of the first activities that I really started to embed, and it became a routine with the students because they knew what was coming up. And it wasn't that it was going to be marked or assessed. They weren't bothered about getting things wrong. It was purely just to know and understand what they could and couldn't remember, because we were at a period of time where we were preparing for an exam. So it was really important to highlight those gaps in knowledge. And that was a resource that I thought really helped with that. And then from that task and knowing and seeing how successful that had been in the classroom, I then built a retrieval book, exercise book for students that they'd all have. Now, looking back at it, I probably think in terms of how long it took me to prepare for the students, there would have been easier ways around it, but it was just something that I really wanted to trial. And what that was a smaller exercise book at the start where they would do all their retrieval tasks in. And I looked at lots of different styles of tasks. So pyramids, where you have questions that are worth 1 mark, all the way up to 6 marks, to get them to challenge themselves and build on answers. So it might be all the questions are related to the same topic, but they're building up in higher order thinking, helping them to build up to a 6-mark answer, for example. And this exercise book just let them keep track of all the different activities that they were doing, and they'd be able to also use that as, if they flicked back, they could see exactly where their gaps in knowledge were. And it became, again, a really good routine with students. They really liked it. They got it out at the start of the lesson. They knew to complete that task straight away. And they used it as a revision resource at the start for then, when they came onto their exams, to use that. So it built up. And then I thought, actually, I can do this without the use of a book. As lovely as the book was, it was great, but wasn't really necessary. I loved making them and the kids loved them, but you get to a point, don't you, where you think, how much time do I really have? Is this really needed and necessary? And there was other ways of implementing it, but it worked really well, and it was a really good way of starting to embed different retrieval activities into the starts of lessons, but also during lessons. So I also used to implement lightning bolt questions, where halfway through the lesson I would just have a random slide and it'd just be, stop, answer this exam question, self-mark it, let's move back onto the lesson, just to get them really thinking on their feet. We haven't covered any of this content about this question, but I want to see if you can recall it quickly, like you're going to have to do in an exam, and switch from what we're currently learning to something else and put you under that pressure. And they were specifically exam questions. And that really helped students, definitely in the process up to exams, actually realise what would they have written under pressure, and would that have got them the marks.
Yeah, I like that element of pressure.
Yeah.
I guess almost, you described the bell task, the starter activity. I guess the pressure's off a little bit with that one, and, the stakes are quite low.
Yeah.
Maybe the lightning bolt task is designed to kind of give them a bit more, so those two things work together. You get some of the low stakes practice and some higher stakes practice as well. And I think both are really helpful, aren't they?
And it was always stressed to them that whatever mark you get, whether it's correct, incorrect, it doesn't matter. I'm not judging you about it. It's for your own assessment tool. And if you are going to choose not to answer it and wait for the answer to come up on the board, then you're only putting yourself down. You're not going to get anything from it. And from that, there was a few reluctant learners to start with. But as we kept on going and they realised, actually, there's a reason why she's putting random questions up in the middle of the lesson, and there's a reason why she's not marking them. It's for my own benefit. And sometimes I would make the point to students of, they'd go, oh, I got all this wrong. And I'd pick it up and I'd throw it in the bin. I said, that's how much it matters. It's just for you to see. And now you've had a task and you've realised, I've got it all wrong. Well, I'm hoping that's going to help you direct your revision. And I really want to build or continue to build a culture in classrooms and in school where it's okay to get things wrong. And actually making mistakes and feeling that sense of failure is all part of the learning process. And it's one of the biggest parts, because if you didn't realise where you'd made mistakes, you wouldn't know where to go to correct them and to get better. So it's building that culture where students feel confident to make a mistake and get it wrong.
So important. You talked about this idea of, building their confidence that it's fine to make mistakes and helping them understand that that's, I guess, part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered, you were talking about building that student buy-in, and you mentioned some of them are a little bit more reluctant at first, but gradually they sort of saw the value over time. Was there anything else that told them or that you did with them that you felt helped in kind of getting everybody on side and understanding why it's such a helpful thing to be doing?
Modelling my own mistakes, because I'm a human just like students, and yes, I am teaching the content and I am planning the content, but I will still make mistakes. And if I ever do live modelling, which I do a lot of the time, and it's really good for students to see that metacognitive thought process of how you approach things. So if I answer an exam question, I will talk through how I'm coming up with this answer. And if I'm live modelling it and writing it, if I make a mistake, I'll just put a cross through it.
Yeah.
And I'll make it clear that I make mistakes too, and it's completely fine. And modelling that, I think, is important as well. And sometimes as well, doing the exam questions with the students. So if a lightning bolt question came up, I'd answer it too. Sometimes I would purposefully maybe make a mistake, and I would ask another student to mark it, and they wouldn't give me full marks. Now, I know I wouldn't get full marks on it because I did it on purpose, but I'm convincing they don't know that, and I let them correct me. And that's also a good way. And you can target that to certain students as well, which can have quite a big impact on their confidence. And some of them were like, Miss, you got that wrong. They're like, yeah, I did. Help me. How do I get it right? Did you make that mistake? We're in the same boat. What can we do together to improve that answer?
I love that. So we've been talking a little bit about implementing retrieval practice, good practice in a classroom setting. Now, I know a lot of your focus in the last couple of years has been around helping learners build confidence in their independent learning beyond the classroom. Talk to me about how that program first came about and how it's developed since.
Honestly, a member of staff approached me in the corridor and said, I've got a really good idea. Why don't you take the work that you've been doing on metacognition and revision and look at building it into tutor time? And I thought, what a good idea. And then I think I just made a massive job for myself, which, don't get me wrong, I've absolutely loved and continue to love doing. And I took that 30-second conversation in a corridor. In the next hour, I was sat at my desk thinking, what can I do? And that's when I came up with the idea of a tutor time curriculum that ran from year 7 to 13 that would help students become better independent learners, equip them with the skills they need to be able to work independently in a way that the message is going to be consistent and is going to take away pressure from tutors and teachers to deliver it in a certain way, but is going to have impact on students from the very start of secondary school. Because I think a lot of us, a lot of teachers, schools, they think, right, GCSEs are coming, year 10. We need to start building in revision into lessons. And I thought about that because I was guilty of it myself. Imagine what our life would be like as teachers if students were already equipped with those skills and that knowledge when they came into year 10. And that's what made me think, right, let's start it in year 7. From the very first year in secondary school, we're going to be talking about revision because they're going to have assessments. They're going to have formative, summative assessments from the very start. So let's teach it from the start. And using tutor time was, for me, the best time to do it because every student has that time. I'd been lucky enough to be allocated time to deliver it. And it also took that pressure off teaching staff to put all of that into their lessons, because I know a lot of teachers are put off by the revision side because they've got so much content to deliver and they almost don't have time to think, oh, I can't be teaching them how to do this because I need to teach them this content and that's more important. Actually reflecting on it, I think teaching your students how to revise your content is as important as teaching them it. But giving them this extra time in tutor time through this curriculum will benefit both teachers and students and is almost giving them even more than what they are already getting. And surely nothing wrong with doing that. So that's what led me to build this curriculum from year 7, and it runs all the way up into year 13, so to sixth form as well. And it's developmental, and it doesn't just look at revision strategies, it also looks at habits, how to deal with exams, why we do mock exams and their importance, how to deal with the stress and the anxiety around exams, how to build good habits. We look at procrastination, multitasking, all those sorts of things as well that students need to know about, and we need to be talking to students about these things. So I mean, I guess that's a little bit of an overview really of the tutor time curriculum that I have been working on, and it's not a finished program because I don't think it ever will be. It will always be continually updated because things change, and I seek out feedback every year from tutors and students and staff on what could make it better. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? Because what I don't want it to be is a PowerPoint that a member of staff opens and the students go, oh God, we did this last year. Oh no, not this again. I want it to be exciting and I want them to get involved with it and take the messages that they're given and be able to utilise the information given too.
Tell me about that feedback then. So How's it been received so far?
So it's been running maybe a couple of years now, not all the way through from year 7th. So this year has been the first time it's ran all the way through from 7 to 13. The year before, not all years covered it, just because obviously, as you can imagine, it's a very big task to do. And it was something that I was doing on my own. And I think one of the key things to point out as well is every PowerPoint that was delivered was voice recorded so that the message was consistent to all students. And it took the pressure off staff as well. So every time the curriculum had been delivered, it isn't something that runs all the way through the year because we didn't have that time allocated in tutor time. So it was done on a termly basis. So after the term had been complete, that's when I'd then seek out feedback. And I got a lot of honest feedback. So to start with, there was too much in the sessions for the period of time that we do it. Now, our tutor time is only 25 minutes. And I think that is the feedback that you're always going to get, because the one thing that I didn't want is for teachers to have not enough to do and be left with, oh, we've got 10 minutes. What do we do now? So I almost overplanned for them, seeked out the feedback and was able to tweak them that way. One of the most recent questionnaires and feedback that I got was students, and it was from all students, year 7 to 13. We have just over 1,600 students in the school, and I got 1,200 responses. So quite a big range there of feedback. And I was asking questions around what are the most effective revision strategies, because that is one of the things that I wanted students to be able to tell me. And that's the message that I was trying to get across for all year groups, to be able to tell me what are the effective revision strategies. And I wanted to see how many of them were using them. So there was only 4 questions, and they were very simple questions, but they allowed me to get some quite good feedback. And over 3/4 of our students could identify all of the effective revision strategies that we talk about. I think over 80% of the students were using at least one of those strategies once a week. So to start off with, because it's only been running a year, I was very happy with that.
That's great. Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to what next year is going to be, because I guess that was my aim for this year, for students to be able to identify the effective strategies. And I tried to trick them because I put the ineffective strategies in there as well. So it was multiple choice.
Very good.
So they had to read through them and select them. So it was really important to me that they could identify those effective strategies. And then I was really keen to know how often they were using them. So yeah, over 80% of the students that responded were using at least one of them once a week, or once or more a week. So for the time, I'm happy with that. And I mean, there's lots more feedback I could go into more detail, but I haven't got it to hand. But I thought that was really good for the first full year of it running, to get that from students. And I get a lot of students coming up to me on a Thursday, I think, when they have the sessions, the year group that I teach PE afterwards. They'll go, oh, miss, we've just heard your voice in tutor time. We've just done your sessions. And I'll have that conversation with them openly. How did you find it? And sometimes I'm like, oh, it was so good. I love doing this experiment, love doing that. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, miss, you spoke a little bit too much. And I'll be like, perfect, thank you. Because I know, right, let's try and get a few more activities in there, because I don't want them to just be listening to my voice. I want them to be engaging in activities as well. So I will openly seek out that feedback. And sometimes I'll be like, oh God, it took me ages to make that. And they've just told me that they hated hearing my voice for so long. But, you know, if I want honest feedback, it's to the students that I need to go to. And I do. And I take that on board and look at how I can tweak it for next time.
But I think this is the journey, you know, we often go on when we're first teaching anything. You know, we learn how to get the essence of what we're trying to communicate across in the most succinct and efficient way, and how to leave as much breathing room around that as possible for people to digest and practice and discuss the ideas and all that good stuff that will actually help it sink in.
Yeah.
Can I dig into some of the details a little bit? Because from what I've seen of your work, you know, one of the things you think really, really hard about, how to bridge that gap between just throwing an idea at students and all the kind of wraparound support that it takes to really help them master the strategies you want them to be using. So I don't know, maybe you could take flashcards as an example, a bit of a case study, if you will. What are some of the things you go through while you're building learners' skills in that particular strategy?
So flashcards, we look at one side with a question, one side with an answer. They can be used in different ways, and they can be used as a method of self-quizzing. One of the things that I make really clear to students to start off with is creating the flashcards is not the revision. It's using the flashcards that is. So just because you've spent 2 hours making flashcards does not mean you have spent 2 hours revising. You've spent 2 hours making a really good revision resource, but you then need to use it. And it's how you use it that makes that effective.
Our own data from the revision census, that's our survey where we've talked to 40,000 students about their revision habits.
Yeah.
So there's about 50%, it's about half of regular flashcard users say they spend the majority of their time self-testing with them, which is great. It's what we want to see.
Yeah.
But then that leaves kind of the other half. And what are they up to? Well, they're spending the majority of their time either writing them in the first place or just even reading them through. So yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
And that's what the next stage of flashcards is, how you use them. So what I say to students is you either need to write it down or say it out loud. If you are not doing one of those two things, you are not using your flashcards properly, because it's very easy to read a question and then look at the answer and go, oh yeah, I was going to say that. Were you? How do you know that? How do you know that unless you have actually said it or actually written it down? And you're just building that false sense of security. So one of the things that I did this year with my year 10 students is, because I wanted them to be using flashcards and I wanted them to be using them effectively. For the first topic, I made the flashcards for them. So I made them on PowerPoint, printed them out, cut them out on card, so that they had what a good one looks like of a pack of flashcards. It's got a really clear question and it's got a really clear answer. And it doesn't have lots of writing on it, because that's really hard for us to process. It's a quick, simple flashcard. So I gave them the flashcards. They didn't have to make them. I then showed them and taught them how to use them effectively. And what I asked them to do in the back of their exercise book was to read the question and then write the answer down. And then put the flashcard to the side and repeat the same process. And I give the students these instructions with their home learning. So it's almost like you can't get it wrong, because Miss has written, read question, write answer down, repeat steps 1 and 2, etc. And then what they can do is they can go back to their flashcards and they can mark their answers. So that's one way of using flashcards to self-quiz. And then I check that. I'm not checking it to see what was wrong or right, but I'm checking that they had written down their answers and marked them. And I asked them to mark them in green pen so that it's clear to see what was right and their misconceptions and what they got wrong. And I will ask them to do that 3 times before the next lesson or before it's due in. So I might set it on Monday, and by next Monday, I want to see evidence of you quizzing yourself 3 times on these flashcards. And what I noticed looking through the books of the students is the first time they did it, there was quite a few incorrect answers. But by the 3rd time they did it, there was more correct answers than there was incorrect answers. And the students needed to see that themselves. And when I had that conversation with them of how did you find that, they were like, I can't believe that. Look how many I got wrong the first time and look in comparison to the 3rd time. And if students can visually see that and see the progress that they're making, that's when they're going to buy into using the strategies, because they're seeing the success. And that was a really useful way of implementing that myself into the classroom that allowed students to build confidence around it. You don't just read a flashcard once, get it right, and never look at it again. You've got to be continuously going back to it. So getting them to do it 3 times before the next time I checked helped them keep revisiting and building that habit. And once we start looking at more content, we have more flashcards, we will be looking at them less often, but we're still going back to them. And I guess that's the lateness system for those that have heard of it, or the box method, where you read a flashcard correct, goes into the next box. If you get it incorrect, that goes right back to the start, and you revisit it less often each time, because that knowledge is becoming stronger in your long-term memory. So you need to visit it less often. But if you do get it wrong, it means we need to revisit it more often to strengthen that knowledge again.
So I think the thing I loved most about that was just how you described, I guess, kind of not just the modeling, but those sort of training wheels as they were first getting exposed to their technique, and the kind of check-ins to make sure that they were implementing all the right things, and also building their confidence that this was working for them before letting them fly. Just one little detail I wanted to ask about. There's been some work done on the generative effect, which suggests that all other things being equal, it's slightly better to write your own flashcards versus use ones that someone else has made. Mm-hmm. A concern that sometimes comes up, particularly with learners that are maybe struggling a little bit with a particular subject, is that sometimes they might write flashcards and kind of miss the right points or even get things wrong on their flashcards. Mm-hmm. I just wondered, from your practical experience, having taken learners through a process as rigorous as the one you described, do you see that still being a concern? Is it okay? Are we reassured on that point if you kind of do the work up front to teach them how to do cards well? Just love to hear your thoughts on how that concern is or isn't an issue for you in your school with your learners.
Yeah, I think it's really important to give students the correct information to start with. And we have built knowledge organisers for all our subjects within school now. And students are always given their knowledge organisers at the start of the term based on the content they will be learning. And that is what we are 100% sure, that's the correct information. This is the need to know information. This is the knowledge that you need to be able to recall. And this is what we're going to be focusing on. We will go into more depth because a knowledge organiser isn't just what your exam's going to be on, because you need to know how to apply it, but it's the concrete information that you must know. And for the Core 4, the first step for every revision strategy is to identify the knowledge. And it's really clear for students that they must have their knowledge organiser there or a textbook with that correct information in. Because, like I said at the very start, time is important and I don't want students to be wasting time. So it's important that they know exactly where to seek that correct information from. And I might say, knowledge organiser, knowledge groups 1 to 4, that's what I want you to create your flashcards on. Really clear, concise instructions for students. And like you said before around the modelling, it needs to be modelled and the teacher needs to be 100% confident that they could do every step themselves at home before asking them to do so. And there'll still be things that I will model to students or I'll get them to show me that they can do before I go ask them to do it at home. And it might be when we do self-quizzing, right, everyone needs to write 3 questions on their mini whiteboard based on knowledge group 1 of their knowledge organiser before they leave. And everyone's going to show me their whiteboard so that I can see, because I need to be confident that you're going to go home and do that properly. So I think that the whole process of checking their understanding and modelling it is really important, and directing them to the exact information as well that they are looking at when they're at home.
I love the specificity and the details that we're getting out in this conversation. It's great. I talk to a lot of schools now that are in various stages of setting up their own learn-to-learn programs of some scope or scale or other. I think most schools are doing at least something, and if they're not, they're actively getting something going next academic year. Mm-hmm. You've perhaps been a bit of more of a pioneer in this area. So I guess from your experience, do you have any other kind of particular do's or don'ts or kind of tips on making a program successful beyond we've talked about quite a lot of great stuff already, but is there anything else you'd particularly want to highlight if you were advising other schools on how to set up successful programs of their own?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if this is something that you want to implement, is for you to really think about why you're doing it. And I think that whole what is your why is sort of the building blocks to making something successful. Because if you don't fully understand why and you're just doing it because revision's important or other schools are doing it or you've seen someone else do it really well so you want to do it, if you've not got a really clear why which is specific to you and your school, then is it going to have as much of an impact as you want it to, and are you going to get that buy-in? So first of all is why are you doing it in the first place? Who is it for? Who is it going to benefit? And also, how are you then going to make it happen? Because it isn't something that can just be done over a weekend of work. And you think about, right, how much time do we have? Do we have tutor time to be able to do it? Or is this something else? Is there another time that we can use to build this in? Some schools may have like PSHCE time. We have a very full tutor time curriculum where students get so much from tutor time that it was quite, I pushed for this time because I knew how much impact it was going to have. So think about how much time do you have before you even start thinking about what sessions you're going to do, what time do you have in the first place? And then think about the content that you want to deliver, because it's more than just revision. If you're going to do this from year 7 to 13, what do you want your students to get out of it? Because in theory, we're doing this to decrease the amount of pressure that students feel when they do their GCSEs in year 11 or their A-levels in year 13. So it's more than just spending all that time on making flashcards and self-quizzing. There's so much more to that. So I almost brainstormed everything that I wanted to cover and then thought about, right, what's best for year 7, year 8, year 9, etc. And all of the sessions, so in year 7, 8, 9, etc., they all start with a session on memory. How does their memory work? Because as staff, we're spoken to about it all the time, of long-term memory and how to build schema and the forgetting pit and all those sorts of things around cognitive science. But students need to know that as well. Because if we want to get them to buy into it, they need to know why they're doing it in the first place and how it's going to benefit them. So we look at things like that as well. And then once you've got your why and your time and the content that you want to deliver, you want to look at how it can be developmental. So do we want to be talking about things like dual coding and spacing and interleaving in year 7? Probably not. It's going to overwhelm them quite a little bit. But we need to be talking about those things in year 11 and year 12 and 13 because that's really important for them. So it's building that curriculum up to, let's just start with the basics in year 7 and build it up over the years. And then we look at how are you going to deliver the sessions. So are you going to be delivering them in person, maybe to a whole year group as an assembly style? Is it going to be voice recorded? Because if so, again, can't just be done on a weekend. It's quite a long process in which that builds up. And do your staff need training? Is there any whole school CPD that needs to be implemented? And this is all before students have actually had the session delivered. And you want to consider the structure of the session. So like I said in feedback that I got from both staff and students where there was a bit too much talking, students got disengaged from it. So what can you build in to keep them engaged and make them as practical as you can? So if you're talking to them about why brain dumps are important and how to do them, get them to brain dump and get them to reflect on it, etc., so that you can make them as practical as possible. And when you are planning them, really think about keeping them clear and concise. What do you want them to take away from that? And maybe have one clear point, one bullet point that you want them to take away from that whole session. Don't expect them to be taking away loads of information and to be able to remember 12 bullet points from the first slide that you showed. What's your key message that you want them to get out of every session? And that's where then you can start looking at, right, we're ready to plan, they're ready to be delivered. So it's a process that takes time, but the time that you put in is going to be, I think it's going to reflect on the impact that it has on the students, because it isn't a, right, let's do it tomorrow job. It's long term, but it's massively beneficial over time, I think.
I mean, I may be biased given what I do for a living, but I can't think of many interventions that we can put in place for our learners today that can have quite as big an impact as the sort of things we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's potentially game-changing. I wonder if maybe we could wrap this thing up with a closing message, if you would, maybe for learners. So I guess one way of framing this might be if you went back and met yourself back in your own school days doing your highlighting and your reading and your rewriting. What little pep talk would you want to give yourself back in the day, given what you've learned since?
Couple of things. First of all, honestly, I don't think you've revised unless you have questioned yourself and you have written something down which you have actively recalled. So always make sure that if you are, now, because I'm not saying don't reread, don't rewrite, because reading is important and rewriting can be important, but you've got to have asked yourself questions at the end of it. So if you are someone who does like reading, because there's lots of students out there that do, and they find that method effective, but think about before you start reading.
Well, they believe that method to be effective.
Yeah, they believe it. What are your 5 questions that you want to be able to answer at the end of it? And write those questions down. And once you've read it, answer those questions. Because that is what I think, that active recall of thinking yourself and answering a question or saying an answer out loud is what's going to have the big impact. And another thing is little and often. When students say that they have spent 4 hours revising one evening, I want to cry for them. Why have you spent 4 hours? Because I'm going to say about 40 minutes of that time was effective. Revise little and often. Revise, have a break, then go back to it. But never sit at your desk for 4 hours revising, because you will have wasted some of your time there. So, revise little and often and plan when you're going to do it. That's going to have a really big impact, and make sure that you're not wasting your time and you're going out and doing the things that you enjoy at the same time. So ask yourself questions and write down answers. For me, one of the most useful techniques is self-quizzing, and to do it little and often. And if you get to a point where you can't answer something, that needs to be the first thing that you go to when you revise next time. Don't just ignore it. Go back to that straight away and learn it.
Katie Holmes, thank you so much. This has been huge fun. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks again, Katie. Do follow what she's up to on Twitter if you're interested in her work. She's at Katie E. Holmes _ I've put the link to that in the show notes. I believe she has a book on the way about how to put together an effective tutor time study skills program. I'm sure she'll be sharing all details with her followers on Twitter if you'd like to keep abreast of that project. So as I reflect back on this episode, I just really honour Katie for the massive effort she's obviously put into the programme at her school. And also one other little detail, like her real openness to feedback. I thought that was so nice and such a nice way of kind of modelling that for us all. Feedback is so important in helping us all continue to learn and grow as educators. And she modelled how to ask for and take and act on feedback so well in that episode, I thought. Now, if you are a teacher in a similar position to Katie, or putting together a similar program, or maybe tasked with just teaching a little bit of study skills in any way, I know how much work it can be to create quality teaching materials. So I teach study skills for a living at schools across the country. So I've put years and years into my own teaching resources, and I'm conscious that there are many other teachers out there that are wanting to teach study skills well as well. So what I've started doing quite recently is making some of my best teaching materials available for others to use in their schools. So I've got a rather good freely available lesson, which you might quite like, on retrieval buy-in, for example, which introduces the all-important principle of retrieval practice and talks about overcoming retrieval resistance. So helping build that practical habit by removing barriers that would otherwise get in the way for learners when they're looking to actually implement the idea. So the lesson resource pack includes teaching slides, a worksheet / handout for learners, and there's even a video of me teaching that same lesson that you can simply play if you'd rather have me deliver the messages rather than teach from my slides. So you can find all of that completely freely available. I just want to get some of these messages out there and help people out. And where I have put a lot of work into things, I want to be able to start to share it. So you can find that lesson resource at examstudyexpert.com /retrieval-lesson. And I've also put the link to that in the show notes. So again, that's examstudyexpert.com /retrieval-lesson. You may even find this very podcast a useful resource to point learners to, particularly kind of maybe it's slightly older learners. We have an absolute wealth of knowledge in the show archives on how to study effectively, and from some of the brightest minds working in this space. And finally, if you are interested in tracking your own progress as a school in getting your students studying smarter, I run a major national survey here in the UK called the Revision Census. We've surveyed 50,000 students to date. So to my knowledge, it's by far the biggest piece of work that's ever been done on this subject, certainly in this country. And we make it freely available for schools to take part in. You get a nice little debrief pack on what your students said in the survey with charts and insights, breaking down what your students are up to in their revision, what they're doing well, where they could improve further. And because I run this at so many schools, I can offer a little bit of context in terms of how your students kind of compare, things they're doing particularly well, any particularly striking opportunities for improvement. Some schools that have been with us for years have found it a really helpful way to keep track of the progress they're making in this really important area of how effectively their students are studying. And I should just say, conscious of my global listenership to the podcast, if you're at a non-use case school and you're interested in getting involved in the revision census, do drop me a message too to see if we can work something out. Either way, all details, if this is something you'd like to look into, are at examstudyexpert.com/revision-census. Always happy to hear from new schools interested in getting involved. I'll pop that link in the show notes too. Again, that's examstudyexpert.com/revision-census. Thank you so much for listening today, and indeed for tuning in throughout this series this week on teaching students to study smarter. And I will look forward to seeing you again soon. We have a wonderful episode coming up on Sunday with John Dunlosky, who's one of the kind of seminal academics in this area. And he talks really, really eloquently about his research and some of it's a highly practical episode as well. Lots of really great practical ideas from him. Wishing everybody every success with all their upcoming exams, and thanks again for listening.
If you've got exams coming up, you can now get all of William's favourite tips and tricks to save you time and get you higher grades, all in one handy cheat sheet. Grab your copy at examstudyexpert.com/free tips. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.